Hello, everyone. I hope you can listen me. If you have some problems, please raise your hand or write something in the chat. So I think I'm recording, so we can start today's Nishida seminar. After the summer break, we start again with our monthly meeting. Today, the speaker is Professor Tremblay, and we are very lucky that also according to the topic Professor Tremblay chose, we have Luca Benzo as discussant. Luca Benzo is not only a philosopher, but a mathematician. So I think the discussion could be very profound and fruitful. And today's talk is based on an essay Professor Tremblay prepared for a book or probably two books because it's much big that we are preparing here at the Institute in collaboration with Professor Loves, Professor Ferrari. So we are preparing a multilingual translation of Nishida's text, Zettai Mujunteiki Jikodoitsu. So we are preparing two books, one volume with the Japanese text and French translation, English translation, Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, Chinese, German, and with a multilingual glossary, and then a second volume of essays on the topic of Zettai Mujunteiki Jikodoitsu. And the presentation, today's presentation is based on the essay Professor Tremblay prepared for this book. So I think we can start. So the presentation is divided into 5 sessions or more or less. So Professor Tremblay will speak for a while, then she will stop, and we have time to put questions or enter in the discussion. And when this discussion time is finished, Professor Tremblay will continue with another session and so on. We hope that we can arrive at the end of the presentation, but let's see. So also you on Zoom, you are of course involved to put questions and to enter in the discussion. So only we can is not necessary to introduce Professor Tremblay because everyone of you knows her. So
You're recording.
I'm recording, so I hope that no one is against this idea. We are recording this workshop. If someone disagrees, please contact me in the chat. So Professor Tremblay, if you are ready,
okay.
Start.
As a title, I choose From Self-Identity to Absolutely Contradictory Self-Identity. I will change the subtitle. For today, I put that subtitle. I will focus on the, for the book, I will focus on the chronological analysis that I made. So I will begin with the introduction. The analysis of the logical structure of the dialectical world, which has occupied Nishida Kitaro since the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, reaches its culmination in the essay titled Absolutely Contradictory Self-Identity, completed on June 18, 1939. In 1941, Nishida retrospectively said that in this essay, he had successfully provided a synthetic elucidation of the foundation of his logic, which constitute the true form of the self-expression of historical life. All the subsequent problems developed by Nishida are grounded in this essay. The concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity marks the philosophical culmination of a rigorous thought process that took decades to develop. It can be traced back to the second period of Nishida's thought, Furthermore, it forms part of a broader re-examination of the concept of identity, which runs throughout Nishida's writings. To demonstrate this, I deem it appropriate to adopt the chronological and linguistic approach. The first section will examine one of the major challenges Nishida encountered, particularly from the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy. This challenge involved determining how the domain of the universal, that is to say space, object, and matter, and the domain of the individual thing, that is to say time, subject, and consciousness, could be unified while preserving the distinct character of each. To address this, Nishida structured these two domains around the concept of concomitance, soku, and the unifying role of the historical world as a medium. Can you see?
Yes, but I like it.
Please take the text. I am on the bottom of page 1. Bottom of page 1. Furthermore, the notable influence of Niels Bohr's concept of complementarity from 1936 enabled Nishida to significantly deepen his understanding of the key concept of concomitance. He attributed central importance to complementarity, particularly the complementarity between subject and object, which eventually led him, beginning in 1937, to the concepts of contradictory self-identity and absolutely contradictory self-identity. Following these clarifications on the concepts of concomitance and complementarity, but not today, I will skip the part on complementarity because my presentation will be too long. Following these clarifications on the concept of concomitance, a detailed explanation will be provided regarding the complex linguistic stages through which Nishida progressed before arriving in 1937 at the concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity. First of all, these stages offer an opportunity to transpose the concomitance between the domain of the individual thing, including consciousness, and the domain of the universal, including matter, into terms of self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements. Before addressing Nishida's other linguistic transformations centered on the concept of self-identity, which is itself equivalent to the concept of concomitance, soku, it will be essential to carefully examine some of Nishida's essays that has until now rarely attracted attention. This corpus refers to the three series of schematic explanations without which the development of Nishida's vocabulary cannot be adequately understood. We have to add to this corpus a lecture Nishida made in 1935 and that Professor Fongaro already translated. It is very important to add this lecture because we have some details that we don't have in the schematic explanations. These schematic explanations, in which the complementarity of time and space assumes a predominant role, illustrate the increasing influence of set theory on the development of Nishida's dialectic from 1935 onwards. Examples from the game of chess will be used to further elucidate his highly complex formulas and schematics. The examples from the game of chess are mine. because I like game, I like chess, and I already use chess in other writings to illustrate Nishida's thought. Simultaneously with his efforts of schematization, Nishida transitioned from the concept of self-identity of absolutely contrary elements to self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements. At the same time, he developed the concept of dialectical thing, which ultimately led him, starting in 1937, to the closely related concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity. It will happen that in this context as well, Borg's complementarity exerted a significant influence. But I don't know if we will go there today, because it's at the end of the presentation. So my first section is titled The Medium and its Two Planes of Determination. A distinctive feature of Nishida's later philosophy is that he located the relation between subject and object within the broader framework of a medium, baikaisha, or a place, basho, in which they face each other or become unified. This concept played a central role in Nishida's philosophy, starting in 1934, particularly in the second volume of the Fundamental Problems of Philosophy. It gained considerable prominence in the first 3 volumes of the philosophical essays. It is important to note that Nishida abbreviated the word medium using the capital M, which corresponds to the first letter of the German noun, das Medium. Excuse me. It's okay. I cannot move it. That's the problem.
You have to go to the arrow, upper left, I think.
Okay, I'm okay now. Thank you. By medium, Nishida usually refers to the world of actuality. Since this world of actuality is concomitantly subjective and objective, it also manifests as a dialectical world. As dialectical world, the medium encompasses 2 self-determinations or 2 interrelated self-metamorphoses. Metamorphosis is a Nishida's vocabulary too. The first determination is the determination in the form of an individual thing, referring to the domain of subject or consciousness. The second self-determination is the determination in the form of a universal, referring to the domain of the object or matter. Between 1934 and 1939, particularly in the 3 series of schematic explanations, Nishida abbreviated the determination of the medium in the form of an individual thing using the capital E, the first letter of the German noun das Einzelnes. For the determination of the medium in the form of a universal, he used the capital E, the first letter of the German noun das Allgemeines. Just look at the kanji, maybe. Regarding the domain of the universal thing, E, it was a constant theme of interest for Nishida. The expression individual thing is used to translate the Japanese kobutsu, which is itself a transposition of Aristoteles' atomon, meaning a thing numerically one or numerically indivisible. The universal thing also corresponds to the Latin individuum, which is a substantivization of the adjective individuus, meaning indivisible and undivided. It applies to that which belongs to or concerns only one entity, is not the good, only one thing. Nishida's conception of the individual thing was also deeply influenced by Leibniz's monad, from the Latin monas, meaning unity. The meaning of which we shall here speak is nothing but a simple substance which enters into compounds. By simple, it means without parts. End of quote. The distinctive quality of this monad is that it represents the universe in a distinct manner, much like how individual things, in Nishida's sense, are each one a way in which the historical world determines itself. In Nishida's thought, the two previous conceptions of the individual thing refer to any form of otherness encountered by the human being, whether it is a mineral, a plant, an animal, or another human. It is the individual. As Nishida emphasizes, everything that stands before the eye must have the significance of a you. The I and you do not merely refer to the face-to-face encounter between two individuals. Everything that stands before the eye, whether it is a mountain, a river, water, or a stone, is a you. That said, it is important to note that, beginning with the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, Nishida most often refers to the human being, the individual, when he uses the expression individual thing. On this point, he unequivocally stated in the second volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy that the individual thing, considered in the direction of the subjectum, is the individual thing in the proper sense, that is, a thing, whereas the individual thing, considered in the predicative direction, is the self. Thus, the individual, that is to say, the domain of the personal self, the subject and consciousness, that is to say, the subjective and internal part of the human being, is determined as an individual thing. It possesses an internal unity conceived in a linear and temporal manner. Oops. To illustrate the temporal aspect of the individual thing, Nishida created a complex circular schematic found in the first volume of Philosophical Essays. To borrow the vocabulary of set theory, this schematic represents the temporal progression of a unique individual self, E, as an element within the domain of the individual thing, capital E, located on the vertical axis. That individual thing E understood as a set, with the capital E understood as a set. In this schematic, the dialectical world, the medium M, is depicted with the discontinuous circle that encompasses the entire schematic. I have some problem with this. Excuse me.
If you go to the upper left, the blue arrow, yes, you can click on it.
Yes,
Yeah, and you select hand instead of, yeah. You select hand, no, the other one.
here?
Yeah, you select that. This should be simpler. Yeah, if you have the hand, it should be simpler, I think.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. At the level of self-determination, at any level of self-determination, the self operates in two opposite directions of the vertical axis, which represents the domain of time. I must say that in Nishida Kitaro Zenshu, in the complete work of Nishida, these schematics, these circular schematics are reversed. The up is down and down is up, and right is left and left is right. I cannot understand the reason of this. My hypothesis is that it was due to Japanese writing. From the top to the bottom and from the right to the left in Meiji's area. But it's only an hypothesis because following the ordinary conception, when we are writing negative numbers, it's from right to left, from left to right. So I change the orientation of the schematic to make a comparison afterward with the Cartesian plane, the Cartesian plane. The first direction, downwards in the previous schematic, indicates the flow towards the past, represented by the negative values, minus E1, minus E2, and minus E3. In Nishida's terms, the value minus E1 refers to the self of the previous instant, or to the self of yesterday, and so on. The second direction, upwards, indicates the passage of time towards the future with positives, with the positive values E1, E2, and E3. The value E1 designates the self of the next instant or the self of tomorrow, and so on. These positive and negative values are also represented along the horizontal axis, symbolizing the domain of space. In contrast to the time axis, the domain of space is the place where all the determinations of the self, past, present, and future, exist. And what about the self of today? For Nishida, it is identical to the point 0, where the horizontal axis intersects the vertical axis perpendicularly. At this point, the individual thing and the present instant are identical. Even more, the point 0 is the origin of the entire series of past and future determinations of the self. In other words, the individual E0, who exists at the present instant, is constantly transformed in a self of yesterday, minus E, by negating itself at each instant. Simultaneously, the self of tomorrow, E1, after having become the present instant E0, will in turn become a past self, minus E. Thus, this individual and temporal progression simultaneously requires a process of self-negation through which the present instant is negated, namely transferred into the past to become a past instant minus E, so that the future instant, E1, can in turn be transformed into a present instant 0. I have to say that when I translated Nishida's schematic explanations, I had a hard time to understand all of this. But It was a long process. The temporal aspect of the self in connection with the concept of space will be discussed again later. But for now, let us focus on the concept of the universal as a determination of the medium, which is closely related to this concept of space. Nishida offered a detailed analysis of the universal A in his book From the Acting Thing to the Saying Self, and the system of universals in light of self-awareness. During this period, he attributed the universal the status of a place of knowledge. In a certain sense, the establishment of conceptual knowledge requires the determination of a universal that encompasses it, that is, a place. Ontologically, Nishida associated the universal A with a wide variety of concepts that serve a similar function, demonstrating that the individual thing, most often the individual, is never separated from it. Depending on the context, the universal can refer to the present, as in the previous schematic, the physical space, the objective world, the world of matter, the biological world, the environment or society. The previous remarks provided an overview of the two self-determinations of the historical world as a medium, namely its determination in the form of an individual thing and its determination in the form of a universal. However, to better understand the following discussion, it is important to note that Nishida also used the abbreviations E and A to group together two series of complementary concepts that are closely linked to the domains of the individual thing, E, and the universal A. Each of these pair concepts will be introduced at the appropriate time to ultimately elucidate the precise meaning of the concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity. Here is a list. Consciousness, body, future, past, interior, exterior, linear, circular, mind, matter, subject, object, time, and space. Okay, we will take here not a break, but a time for discussion.
If you, yes, something to say.
Yeah, an important question here, in my opinion, concerns the position of the dialectical word M in the construction of this contradictory self-identity.
Yes.
I think we could interpret the dialectical word M in two possible ways. One way we saw in the diagram when we saw the discontinuous cycles. I mean, Nishida is trying to interpret maybe M as a basho,
Yes,
encompassing
of course.
E, the individual element, and A,
Yes.
the universal element. But there's maybe a second possibility to interpret this dialectical word, which exploits the terminology of the medium. That is, if we interpret the individual E as a subject, the universal A as a predicate, and M could be or should be the judgment linking the two, connecting the two.
As a place, yes.
In the predicative logic, Nishida states that, we could interpret the judgment linking universal and particular as a medium. And so this could be a second possible interpretation for the word M.
Excuse me, Nishida actually said that the judgment is a medium, a baikal, but as such, the concept of medium was not so important in the fourth book of Nishida Kitaro's Enshu. It became important from the sixth book, The Fundamental Problems of Philosophy. But actually, it was already there. In germ, maybe. You're right on this.
But is this shifting linked also to the shifting of terminology between self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements to absolutely contradictory self-identity? Because in the first case, the two elements are themselves contradictory. In the second case, the contradiction arises from the fact that the elements which are not necessarily contradictory are posing contradiction because they are at the same time identified and different. So in one case, one could say the contradiction arises from the elements, and the second case, the contradiction arises from the dialectical word himself. So the role of the M is different.
We have to wait until 6 o'clock maybe to answer that question. What is important in your question is that from even before the second period, there was always two parts. That E part and that A part were always in Nishida's philosophy as contrary elements. So there is no discontinuity. It is a constant progression. So I can say that for now. I will return to it very soon.
But why would the two perspectives be in contradiction, the subjective perspective and the objective perspective? I mean, we live with them all the time. We have the subjective experience, which is temporal, and the objective world, which is spatial, to simplify. What's the contradiction?
Yes, because it depends of our conception of contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of these expressions, I kept the word contradiction or contradictory. But after when Nishida is speaking about the relation as such between time and space, or the one individual with another individual, I changed my translation. I use face to face or facing each other. It is very convenient because in French, at least, facing is to be face to face, but there is an element of opposition in that. But I decide to use facing each other or face to face because of the negative connotation of the word opposition. Mm-hmm. Because if we read Nishida's philosophy of in the late period using always the word opposition, it becomes very strange. It is not, because if we speak about opposition, it's all. We have nothing else. But in the case of the expressions like identity, self-identity of contradictory elements, we have the self-identity to counterbalance the very strong connotation of opposition. We have several concepts, we will see this afterward, like identity, unity, concomitance, complementarity eventually, continuity. And when Nishida speaks about opposed concepts, we have always that kind of unifying concept.
Mm-hmm. But now, sorry, I read a few pages on about Niels Bohr, and complementarity is a kind of contradiction because you have two different perspectives on an atom, and one of them is correct and the other is correct, but they cannot both be correct together. You know what I mean?
Yes. Maybe I have to read that part.
We should.
You think so?
I think we should.
I will read it. Maybe I have to plan another seminar. Yes, I will read it. It's very important to speak about Niels Bohr's complementarity because Nishida based himself completely on that concept. I will read it. Okay. Is there some questions from people on Zoom?
I don't see any questions. So
I just have,
This chart is your chart or is that
It's mine, it's mine.
it's your chart? And then, but it's following where Nishida uses these terms to make up this chart.
Yes, of course.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, you are right. In my chapter, I have to make the difference between my charts and Nishida's schematics. But when I put Nishida's schematics, I have a footnote.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have no footnote. Yes,
Has Nishida ever used the German for the medium?
yes, medium, yes.
So he uses the word medium?
Yes, of course.
Okay, and does he
In German?
use the word Mittel? Mittel?
Matter?
No,
Mitte, the center, or?
Mittel, so means.
Yes, but in other context. In the first philosophical essays. But it's I will check. I will check.
I don't remember, at least in the major. No, I really don't remember.
But I will check. I'm not sure that it is meter. I'm not sure. I will check.
So, but for the medium that's been spoken about here, he uses the German medium.
Yes.
Okay.
I also found, you were saying before, I also found very interesting when you translated Tairitsu to face a face, right?
Yes.
Or face to face, right? Because I usually would translate as in Portuguese, at least as confronto.
A conflict
Confrontation or something.
is not bad.
Yeah, so.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a good translation.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe in English or in Spanish. But in French, confrontation it's a little a fighting. So we have to be careful.
Yeah, that's my first translated to confronto in Portuguese. I don't know what would you use for
probably I translate normally contrapposizione.
Contraposizione. Okay.
You have that term in Italian, not in French.
Not in French.
Oh, because we have contraposizione in Portuguese.
Contraposition is a beautiful word.
It's a very normal word. It's Portuguese.
Yes.
Contraposição is not
Very interesting.
a jargon or anything.
If you go
Contraposition, ça existe?
Contraposition?
Ça existe pas?
you know, but if you go to the original root of the idea of confrontation, what really meant
Oh, yeah.
affronting with somebody.
Yeah,
Yes.
front to
And
front or something.
It would be into German, it would be Auseinandersetzung. And the same character that Nishida is using would be used to translate Auseinandersetzung. And the idea of an Auseinandersetzung is a positing out of one another. It's a opposition over some element. So originally it was a word that a legal word that designated the conflict or the confrontation or the strife over money between a creditor and a debtor. So there is no debtor without a creditor, and there's no creditor without a debtor. They exist only, they come out of the relational structure. And so confrontation is not a bad thing, but we finally didn't use that in English simply because it doesn't work in other places as a text, and it does have in contemporary English more confrontation.
Like in French.
Face à face for me is also, if I say so, my understanding of the term face à face is it's not a nice conversation I'm going to have with somebody. It's going to have a direct. I'll have a face à face avec lui.
But in French, it's a very neutral.
Probably the interesting thing that we think in
Yes.
French, English, Italian, Portuguese
They
are
are
very similar,
different.
but they are not.
But I think the nuances, I think that's the thing, yeah.
Why does nobody mention the word gegen and gegenüber? which is both contrastive and opposition, but it's also close.
Because in Gegenüber, the structure of Gegenüber is that you have oppositions that then come into. And the dynamic here, if I understand it correctly, is that the oppositions come out of and exist only in that relational moment. So the oppositions of body and consciousness, it's not that you have body over there and consciousness over there, and suddenly they bang into each other. This is that these are contradictory structures that come out of the same relationship, hence the absolute contradictory self-identity.
But isn't this contradiction the product of Descartes?
Yes, Nishida, when Nishida speaks about the opposition of subject and object, I maintain that term because it's always negative, a negative connotation. But when Nishida speaks about contradictory terms, opposite, contrary, in fact, Nishida speaks we will see afterward, Nishida speaks about contrary concepts or a contradictory concept, not opposite concepts. Because when you use opposition, it's always to criticize precisely that philosophy coming from Descartes.
Yeah, which term do you translate with opposition in this case?
I maintain opposition.
Yes, but what is the Japanese original that you are?
Tairitsu.
Taritsu. Oh.
Shukyaku Tairitsu. I have to maintain that term because Nishida is always criticizing that opposition, subject-object opposition. Shall we continue
Yes.
with the concomitance and the complementarity?
Good, okay.
That's fascinating, you will see. Nishida then takes a further step by stating that in addition to determining itself in the form of an individual thing, A, and in the form of a universal E, A, the medium consists of the concomitance of these two determinations. Concomitance is the translation, my translation of Soku. Within the context of the influence of the Niels Bohr's concept of complementarity, I had to choose a term in French similar to complementarity and far from Buddhism. So I chose concomitance. Why far from Buddhism? Because Buddhism does not appear in that context, and because okay, we will see that. Thus, all of the concepts listed above associated with these two determinations are also linked through concomitance. Here are the two formulas by means of which Nishida expresses this concept. This is my chart, but from Nishida's vocabulary. It is important to note that Nishida uses both the mathematical sign for congruence and the word soku to represent concomitance. Both symbols indicate that the domains of subject E and object A cannot exist separately from one another in a manner similar to Niels Bohr's complementarity, as we will discuss below. Additionally, Nishida employs the concept of the parallelism of matter and mind to account for these two complementary aspects of the same medium. The following schematic, drawn from the preface of the second volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, further illustrates the relationship between the medium and its two determinations, A and E, as related through concomitance. In his schematics and formulas, Nishida almost always use A before E. I think I know why, because everybody always emphasizes the subject side, and Nishida wants to put the attention of the universal side. He wants to put the attention to the world itself. Nishida's use of the concept of concomitance is fascinating, both linguistically and conceptually. For example, he said, within the dialectical universal, the determination in the form of an individual thing is concomitant with the determination in the form of a universal, while the determination in the form of a universal is concomitant with the determination in the form of an individual thing. As translators, we always our attention was always attracted by that kind of formulas. Nishida says one sentence, and in the following sentence, he says the contrary, because to avoid to draw attention only on one side of the medium. What exactly is this concept of concomitance that allows Nishida to relate the concepts associated with the aforementioned two domains, and which he would later transpose starting in 1937 and through a complex evolution of his vocabulary into the concept of contradictory self-identity? Associated with its adjectival form and adverbial form, the concept of concomitance reflects the growing importance Nishida placed on the relationships between contrary concepts, as well as the necessity of emphasizing their dynamic tension rather than reducing them to a simple identification. Formally, concomitance is expressed as follows. There is no A without B and no B without A. A compelling example of the use of the concept of concomitance is found in the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, where no fewer than 5 pairs of interrelated terms are organized around this concept. These include the plane of absolute affirmation and the plane of absolute negation, being and nothingness, life and death, as well as the I and the you, which represent two individual things. Nishida writes, it is within the framework of the concomitance of the plane of absolute negation and the plane of absolute affirmation that individual things are determined and interact. The I and the you face each other and mutually determine one another in the absolute plane corresponding to the concomitance of being and nothingness, the concomitance of death and life. It is a long phrase in English or in French, but in Japanese it's short because we have a term, soku, another term, a term, soku, another term. The relationship between the subject, which belongs to the domain of the individual thing, E, and the object, which belongs to the domain of the universal A, is a key topic for deepening the significance of the concept of concomitance. The plane of the subject E, namely the self, is involved whenever Nishida emphasizes the determination of the individual thing. The plane of the object A is expressed in terms of the objective world and the determination of the universal. At times, Nishida concentrates on the structure of the plane of the subject. At other times, he downplays the subject to highlight the plane of the object. Nevertheless, through the concept of concomitance, both perspectives are always integral in his discourse. An example of this conceptual framework is found in the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, where Nishida placed significant emphasis on the relationship between the self and the world. That said, there is no isolated subjective world, the one in which the individual thing is determined. There is no simple world of time. If that were the case, it will merely be an abstract world. The true world of creative evolution must consist of a dialectical determination where the subject is concomitant with the object and where the object is concomitant with the subject. In this world, the determination in the form of the individual thing and the determination in the form of the environment are concomitant. Okay, I will read that part about Niels Bohr's complementarity. To gain a proper understanding of the concept of concomitance, as well as the concept of contradictory self-identity that will be discussed later, it is essential to acknowledge the profound influence of the concept of complementarity on Nishida's philosophy from 1935 onwards. That concept has been developed by the Danish physicist Niels Bohr beginning in 1927. Nishida repeatedly emphasized that structurally, Bohr's complementarity was equivalent to his own concept of concomitance. Associated with the broader philosophical implications it raised, the concept of complementarity is renowned not only in quantum mechanics, but also in various other fields of knowledge. This concept allows for the complementary explanation of two aspects that are mutually incompatible, yet both are necessary to provide a complete description of atomic systems. Bohr states that, far from being inconsistent, the aspects of quantum phenomena revealed by experience obtained under such mutually exclusive conditions must thus be considered as complementary to each other in quite a novel way. For example, the position and momentum of an atom exist in a state of complementarity, a point Nishida himself emphasized on several occasions. Here is Bohr's definition of complementarity from his essay entitled The Unity of Knowledge. A most conspicuous characteristic of atomic physics is the novel relationship between phenomena observed under experimental conditions, demanding different elementary concepts for their description. Indeed, however contrasting such phenomena might appear when attempting to picture a course of atomic processes on classical lines, they have to be considered as complementary in the sense that they represent equally essential aspects of well-defined knowledge about atomic systems and together exhaust this knowledge. Bohr's 1937 lectures in Japan, which prominently employed the concept of complementarity, standing at the intersection of physics and philosophy, sparked heated debates not only among physicists, but also among philosophers. This concept, in particular, had a profound influence on Nishida. Also, at first in Tanabe and then on Nishida, in fact. In his reinterpretation of Bohr's philosophically significant writings, Nishida openly criticized the radical separation established since Descartes between opposed concepts, such as the subject and the object, consciousness and body, and time and space. He regarded complementarity as an absolutely necessary principle. Nishida's explicit references to Bohr began in January 1935 during his lecture, The Logical Structure of the World of Actuality, in the context of discussions on the atom and the electron. Then, on February 24, he wrote a letter to his son, Nishida Sotohiko, who was himself a physicist, making the following remarks. It is a good thing to study the problem of the structure of the atomic nucleus, but have you returned to Rutherford, Bohr, and Joliot-Curie? Physics in this period was very interesting. Furthermore, Nishida explicitly associated Bohr's name with the concept of complementarity for the first time in the summer of 1936 in his essay, Logic and Life, the opening essay of the second volume of his philosophical essays. He reasserted the concepts he had begun to develop in 1933 in the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, explicitly situating them within the framework of complementarity. The striking structural similarities between Bohr's philosophically oriented essays and Nishida's writings from 1933 suggest that Bohr's complementarity has begun influencing Nishida's philosophy even before 1936. It is my supposition. As early as the summer of 1936, Nishida began directly linking and at times even equating Nishida's complementarity with his own concept of concomitance, soku. Between 1937 and 1940, he further associated these concepts with the absolutely contradictory self-identity. We will see at the end of my presentation. For example, he explicitly connected out three concepts in the schematic explanations, which form the 5th chapter of the second volume of philosophical essays. In the historical world, things are essentially expressive. This holds true even of the material world. This holds true even of the material world insofar as it is understood in relation to the historical world. It must designate the world of contradictory self-identity, which is modeled on the reciprocal complementarity of subject and object. The world conceived as the self-determination of nothingness, where phenomena and reality are concomitant, must take form expressively. I must say here that I was very frustrated to write it in English because in the Japanese text, Nishida linked the reciprocal complementarity and the contradictory self-identity using the word soku, so the tiki. Okay, so the the contradictory self-identity is characterized by complementarity. A striking illustration of Borg's influence on Nishida is found in his analysis of the concomitance of subject and object, a topic primarily derived from the problem of the observer in quantum mechanics. Nishida had recognized that in microphysics, the intervention of the experimenter inevitably alters the observed phenomenon. Borg has articulated this problem clearly in 1932. Now, the quantum postulate implies that any observation of atomic phenomena will involve an interaction with the agency of observation not to be neglected. Accordingly, an independent reality in the ordinary physical sense can neither be ascribed to the phenomena nor to the agencies of observation. In Nishida's view, one of the philosophical implications hidden in the new role assigned to the observer, in line with Borg, is the dissolution of the strict demarcation between the humanities and the natural sciences, a separation he had consistently criticized. As he noted in 1933, there is no true physical reality apart from the physical measurement. Here, the subject must be involved because the physical measurement is the acting of the subject. This brief, seemingly innocuous phrase regarding the role of the subject is, in fact, of paramount importance when considering Nishida's later writings on the philosophy of science. However, one should not attribute to him the intention of reintroducing a new form of subjectivism. Of course, I do not intend to adopt a subjectivist position to deny objects. Truly concrete reality is the self-identity of absolutely contrary elements, and what is determined by it must be concomitantly subjective and objective, as well as concomitantly objective and subjective. In this sense, reality is truly dialectical. In the same vein, Nishida transposed Borg's complementarity in 1937 through his own concept of acting intuition. This concept signifies that the action of the self enters into the world in a complementary manner, particularly in the context of scientific observation, where the subject's intervention in atomic processes causes changes in particle positions. Ultimately, says Nishida, acting intuition consists in an acting that enters into the object. It does not involve perceiving the world subjectively. It means that our action is a complementary aspect of reality. The connections Borg himself established between psychology and physics are particularly important for understanding the concomitance of subject and object in Nishida's philosophy. These connections are directly tied to one of the general epistemological problems both Borg and Nishida confronted. This issue can be formulated as follows. If it is impossible in quantum mechanics to draw a clear distinction between physical phenomena and their observation, it becomes equally difficult to establish a sharp boundary between sub-object and subject. in the psychological analysis. So I am analyzing myself as an object. Me as a subject, I am analyzing myself as an object. Bohr addressed this in his 1929 essay, The Quantum of Action and the Description of Nature, stating, the epistemological problem under discussion may be characterized briefly as follows. For describing our mental activity, we require, on one hand, an objectively given content to be placed in opposition to a perceiving subject, while, on the other hand, it is already, as is already implied in such an assertion, no sharp separation between object and subject can be maintained, since the perceiving subject also belongs to our mental content. From these circumstances follows not only the relative meaning of every concept, or rather of every word, the meaning depending upon our arbitrary choice of viewpoint, but also that we must, in general, be prepared to accept the fact that a complete elucidation of one and the same object may require diverse points of view which defy a unique description. Indeed, strictly speaking, the conscious analysis of any concept stands in a relation of exclusion to its immediate application. The necessity of taking recourse to a complementary or reciprocal mode of description is perhaps most familiar to us from psychological problems. This is a Lisborg style, writing style.
It's very clever.
Very clear, and it's a shame that he was not able to write more about the psychological problems.
They're most familiar to us, I say. To us from psychological
To us. Yes, I have to correct it. So, thank you. The essence of Bohr's remarks is that if the content of consciousness changes as soon as attention is directed toward one of its elements, it becomes impossible to clearly distinguish the subject who observes the noetic self, in Nishida's term, from the subject who is the object of observation, the noematic self. Thus, the boundary between subject and object becomes fluid, shifting according to the needs of the investigation. In short, physics rediscovered a situation already familiar in the human sciences, particularly in introspective psychology. The involvement of the knowing subject in the object of investigation, namely itself, or oneself. Nishida acknowledged the significance of this epistemological analogy between physics and psychology in 1937. He argued that the unification quantum mechanics established between the two fields is of utmost importance, as the world is not formed by the strict mechanical causes of classical physics acting between phenomena, but through the concomitance of subject and object. Nishida extended this new status of the subject, inherited from quantum mechanics, and its conjunction with the object, to the broader topic of the relationship between the self and the world. Influenced by Bohr, he saw in the concept of concomitance a privileged means to further advance his efforts to overcome the Cartesian-inspired subject-object dualism. In other words, Nishida questioned the traditional conception of a separate, self-sufficient subject in relation to a world understood merely as a collection of objects for analysis. In doing so, Nishida repositioned the self in its original place within the world, where it interacts with a multitude of other individual things. By presenting the actions of the self in concomitance with reality, that is, by situating the subject within the historical world, that is the medium, Nishida enacted a radical reversal, leading him to conceive of the self from the perspective of the world, rather than understanding the world from the perspective of the self. Until the end of his life, Nishida continued to regularly emphasize the importance of the concomitance between the self and the world. In his 1939 essay, Experimental Science, among others, he highlighted this unavoidable presupposition. We do not leave the world, but rather enter deeper into it. We become members of the world. In other words, consistent with the fundamental meaning of the concept of concomitance, the self must be understood through its relations to its space, which is the world. Both's influence led Nishida to establish a logic capable of expressing the development of the historical world, as well as the complementary links between this historical world on one hand and the bodily and active self on the other. To illustrate the direct influence of Niels Bohr on Nishida's philosophy and the close links he established between subject and object, it is useful to refer to the famous example of Bohr's cane. As a practitioner of martial arts, I myself was very interested by that example. And in fact, it is very enlightening to compare that Bohr's cane to Nishida's philosophy. Bohr actually borrowed this comparison from psychologists. In an article published in June 1929, in honor to the 50th anniversary of Planck's doctorate, he explains the following. In considering the resignation with regard to the desires for visualization, which gave our whole language its character, to which we are compelled by the situation discussed above, it is very instructive that already in simple psychological experiences, we come upon fundamental features not only on the relativistic, but also of the reciprocal view. The relativity of our perception of motion, with which we become conversant as children when traveling by ship or by train, corresponds to commonplace experiences on the reciprocal character of the perception of touch. One need only remember here the sensation, often cited by psychologists, which everyone has experienced when attempting to orient himself in a dark room by feeling with a stick. When the stick is held loosely, it appears to the sense of touch to be an object. When, however, it is held firmly, we lose the sensation that it is a foreign body, and the impression of touch becomes immediately localized at the point where the stick is touching the body under investigation. Thus, the cane becomes an extension of the body of whoever uses it. In his 1945 essay, Life, Nishida revisited this analogy to illustrate that physical experimentation must originate from the body, with its measuring instruments serving as extensions of the body itself. Our body is necessarily self-expressive, otherwise it would not exist. Some argue that our bodily perception arises from the linguistic expression of our labor. Even physical knowledge must be rooted on the active intuition of the hand. Instruments serve as extensions of the hand. They are projections of our bodies into the external world. Bohr points out that if we lightly hold a cane in a dark room, it remains a simple object, but if we grasp it firmly, it becomes directly connected to our body. To claim that thought and sensation, the self and the body, are opposed from the outset is a fundamental mistake. Likewise, placing the self outside the body and reducing it to a mere observing eyes is another mistake. As the self-expressive element of the world, the self is contained within the body and awakened to itself through the historical body. Just a few paragraphs. In fact, the use of a cane in a darkened room is part of a broader issue. The human ability to create tools. Oh, I will skip that part. Okay. Okay. So I will take a short break here to listen to your questions or commentaries. You will see after how it is linked to the concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity.
Also, the participant on Zoom, you can switch your microphone on and put your question, if you please.
I think there's a technical point which is difficult, but we really have to solve here. Because I read Bohr's citation. Far from being inconsistent, the aspects of quantum phenomena revealed by experience obtained under such mutually exclusive conditions must be considered as complementary to each other in quite a novel way. So Bohr is stressing far from being inconsistent. And he stresses also the fact that these two complementary descriptions, phenomena, are aspects. So I remember that we already discussed this thing in a previous seminary, but the conclusion we arrived was that the mathematical formalization of quantum physics was not did not constitute a formal violation of the principle of non-contradiction. Because there's this reference to the complementary aspects. So we are talking about two different aspects, and Bohr states that it is far from being inconsistent. But at this point, the question remains, when Nishida is talking about contradictory self-identity, is he talking about a real formal violation of the principle of contradiction or not? Is this term just used in an imprecise, evocative way? Or are we really talking about a formal violation of the principle of contradiction?
Nishida insists a lot about the importance of the principle of contradiction. About the three principles of the thinking. He always says they are inviolable. But what he's speaking about is it's not a violation of the principle of contradiction, because he's speaking about other things. Okay? Aristotle and logic are speaking about laws of thought, of thinking. But Nishida respects this. But he's speaking about the working of the historical world. And in that historical world, these principles of thought are not applying directly. They are applying when we are speaking about the world, okay? When we are speaking about concepts, absolutely contradictory self-identity, we are applying the principle of non-contradiction on our discourse. But the word itself is, the working of the word itself is not working from these principles. We use these principles when we speak about the world. But the word itself is not ruled by these concepts, by these laws. Maybe I'm not clear.
No, it's very clear.
But Bohr said the same exactly. He always said, if we speak about the complementarity, we have to use the phrasing, we have to use the concepts of classical physics. We have no choice. That's the same. Because classical physics, it's not something to be thrown away. And we don't have to focus to say, quantum mechanics is the only true physics now. No, they are different, but they are complementary too. So what Nishida is speaking about is different from the laws of logic, but it is not in contradiction with them. We have to use them when we are analyzing Nishida, when we are analyzing the world. But the world itself is not ruled by these laws.
Doesn't this introduce somehow a discontinuity between Nishida's dialectics and Hegel's dialectics? Because in Hegel's dialectics, formal violation of the principle of contradiction is the law of motion of things, it's the law of evolution of things.
Like the butterfly contradicts the larva, you know, the oak contradicts the acorn. It's self-contradiction.
Insofar it is finite.
Evolutionary, yeah.
But Joseph is a specialist of Hegel.
But I can't say that. Nobody is actually. Very few people can say they are that. And I've not read him for quite a while. I can't get the phrase right. The perfect self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements. Looking at that phrase out of context, I would say it's like the self-identity of the acorn and the oak. They are absolutely contradictory, but they are nonetheless identical in an evolutionary context. But I don't think Nishida is thinking in an evolutionary way. Is he? I think he's thinking in a more kind of categorical way that's supposed to embrace everything. It's web. But I'm very suspicious, of course. I mean, of course, complementarity is a wonderful idea. But there's a tendency to say sukurida, you know, Nishida comes along and says, that's exactly what I mean. But it's not. I mean, there's a tendency to amalgamate different structures. And I love what you quoted just a while ago from Bohr. What's wonderful about that is, you know, he mentioned psychology, and of course it's an old chestnut that you have the subject perceiving itself as an object, but that remains enclosed in the psychological world. And whereas what Bohr does is he takes the revolutionary step of carrying it over to the physical world. The world of physics suddenly becomes caught up in this kind of thing, which introduces an element of uncertainty, the uncertainty principle, which, what does that really mean? Does it mean real uncertainty, or is it just choosing between two angles, which you can't choose because they're changing? Once the subject enters the picture, it becomes part of the picture. And then the objective world that you're looking at is changing all the time because you are looking at it and you are part of the looking and what's seen. And I don't know, was he the first, but was he the first that ever made this step from the world of kind of psychological paradoxes and kind of epistemological paradoxes about the mind's knowledge of itself into the dealings of physicists with the external world? Was he the first to do that? That is a very revolutionary thing. You know what I mean? If the physical world itself becomes a target of complementary perspectives and loses its self-identity, loses its stable identity because it is constantly shifting depending on the angle. I think that's a great revolution, like Einstein's. Was he the first, though? Who was the first to?
There's a generation of physicists, Bohr.
But Niels Bohr was the first. Einstein always rejected quantum mechanics, but he highlighted that it was not complementarity, but the duality wave particle in the light.
Einstein.
But the first was Max Planck, in fact.
Yes. Yes.
But you have to cite Heisenberg, the interdetermination principles. Is a big part of this comprehension of the fact that you cannot just separate the observer from the physical world.
But the problem you are pointing to, and it is the same problem, is the transition from the quantum mechanics world, the microphysics, to the two macrophysics. Nishida, of course, his concept of concomitance is not the same as complementarity, but Nishida succeed doing that transition from the quantum world to the macroscopic world using using the psychology and the status of subject and object in psychology.
It's actually very interesting because 20 years earlier, he was really into this radical empiricism of William James, where we have this reality that can be taken in, you can analyze it in two perspectives, from as a subjective continuation of my perception, but actually it's an objective event. So it's the same thing. It's not two different things, right? But it is the taking of this stuff. So it is a reworking of that idea, but in a different, I mean, he uses this person to try to say the same kind of thing. And now it's Bohr rather than William James, but it's what he's trying to do. I think there is a continuation of this thought. And it's, but then what's new is this notion of the individual. It is, how do you say it? It's like a first person take on, say, I have this bottle. I mean, it's an action intuition. Only through the action can you reach the individual, not a concept. I have a concept of this bottle. It's a universal. This bottle is even a universal, right? But I can only grab it, the individual, through an action. So it's this action intuition is actually completely central to this whole picture, right? You pick up things with your actions. It's not a concept. It's not a representation. It's not a it's not about this bottle, but you use this, and you can only pick it up because it's an individual to an individual in action, right? So
Yes.
the it's a, I mean, that's a whole history. Yeah, we use a bottle, how is the bottle created? So it's like an entire history is the now in my picking up the bottle. Yeah,
It's very close to the concept of concomitance.
yeah, it is the component.
Nishida has a set of concepts alike, like Koite-Kichokkan
Yeah.
and the historical body too.
Yeah. And
The body is the A part, and the
Yeah.
historical is the E part, because only the historical world can be can give rise to the consciousness.
that's right.
So, and the continuity of discontinuities and so on.
Yeah,
We had a lot of concepts alike.
and it's this, yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting to read this in that context. He's what he's trying to do.
This is a bit misleading because yes, the world that we experience is suffused by our subjectivity. And William James got a sense of the practical, pragmatic nature of knowledge and truth and so on. But this is not anything like Bohr, because Bohr is writing as a scientist. It's the objective knowledge of the world through science that becomes suffused with subjectivity, which does not happen in James or any of those people. I mean, James has a wonderful statement, if you like to quote, it's a little bit irrelevant. The mission of thinking is not to describe or reduplicate the world. No, it's not to describe or reduplicate existence, but to aggrandize it and to elevate it, to make it bigger and to augment and to elevate it. Then it's a brilliant idea. Thinking is changing the world and raising it to a new level, raising our existence to a new level. Which, by the way, I think is the idea behind his brother's novels as well. They're much more philosophical than meets the eye because they're all about thinking. Nothing is described in his novels except through thought, which is always changing and innovating. However, beside the point, none of that is like Niels Bohr, because none of that has the clincher of an objective. If Bohr can be credited, I do not think about science, but he seems to take a step where the hard world of science, which seemed impregnable to these kind of fuddy-duddy philosophical ideas, suddenly yields. He finds a place where it yields, where the description of objective scientific things becomes impossible because the observer is always there. And he's showing it scientifically. At least he seems to be.
And this is what interested Nishida most, that place of the subject, that subjectivity.
Mm-hmm. But he's gone beyond early stuff.
Yeah. He never refers back to James after late 19 teens.
Mm-hmm. But does he refer to James all that much?
In 1911, yeah.
Yes.
He read a lot of radical, but see, radical empiricism is also not like James. I mean, that's a very unique writing of James.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not at all like James's psychology. So, yeah, so it's also a bit different within James too.
Even his like pure experience and stuff, it's completely different from James, right? Still the same name.
But is it really? I mean, is there a controversy about that going back a long time? I mean, I'm not sure which side Jim Heisig is on. Does he interpret pure experience as Jamesian? I don't think he does. I think he rejects that interpretation. So it's more like Zen. It's a kind of.
It is more like.
Yeah.
But he uses James.
But what we see Nishida doing here in the late 1930s is basically the same thing that he was doing 10 years prior when he was talking about. Yeah.
But he's trying to find other ways to articulate.
It just changed Einstein to Bohr.
But this hard science is very important because
sure.
That's the break from the subjective, because the hard science is not subjective.
I don't know how much or what exactly does he says about Bohr in most of his correspondence. But for example, in his correspondence, when he's talking about Einstein, 1927, 6 or something, he says that I believe that Mr. Einstein's physics has much more philosophy than Einstein himself is aware of or something. So I don't know.
But
How does he feel about Bohr?
he met Einstein in 1922.
You met him?
Yes, in Japan. Nishida met Einstein in Japan.
Yeah, because he recommended You want me to invite Einstein here?
Yes.
Right.
He was, he incited Bonamy to invite Einstein, but Bohr published, announced its concept of complementarity in 1927. So when Nishida came in contact with Bohr, Bohr took a very strong influence on him. And Bohr too came in Japan in 1937. And from that day on, that influence came stronger and stronger on Nishida.
I had no idea. So Nishida did have a very deep investment in studying hard science and meeting these geniuses.
Of course.
Quite amazing. I didn't know that at all.
Heisenberg and Pauli, Dirac came to Japan too.
Dear,
There's this essay from Einstein, How I Created the Theory of Relativity. And how I created the theory of relativity. It's an essay based on the lecture that he gave in Kyoto University.
amazing.
And he says that Einstein himself says that he was inspired by Nishida's question to him. So
Not only
Yeah,
inspired,
right.
Nishida directly asked
yeah.
Einstein.
No, I mean, the essay was inspired by his question. He says that it's one of the best questions he was ever asked or something like that. So
Je tombe des nues. Je n'imaginais pas. I could not imagine Nishida
Yeah.
quizzing Einstein. I have to revise my whole picture.
I love the correspondence when Nishida is so disappointed at the Japanese population because when Einstein came to Japan, they received Einstein here as a Hollywood star.
Yeah.
So disappointed. Yeah, right. He was disappointed.
His appearance that mysterious.
And when Bohr came, the media were not interested in Bohr because they said, compared to Einstein, Bohr looks very boring individual.
Because Einstein was very. Yeah.
So Nishida was very angry about that too.
You know, something that especially when I was doing, sorry to monopolize the thing, but
It's okay.
especially when I working in the Portuguese translation, for example, I always feel that Nishida, he seems to have, it seems that for him, it's very easy to deal with this contradictory, I always wonder if for him it was easier to deal with contradictions just because he was Japanese. You know what I mean? Because, for example, in Japanese, we have many expressions that we don't usually have in our languages, like umu, like ari and mu, or joge, or sayu, and it always felt to me that as a Japanese, it was much easier for him to work with this. So that's why maybe he identified so much with Bohr's. But that's just something I was
I think
thinking. I
that's
don't
true,
know.
because in English or any other language, you have to stick in and.
Yes, right.
And then he was totally concerned with this, what do you call these grammatically, these connectives, right? What's with this connectives?
Mhm.
Ontologically, it makes a huge difference whether there's the connective there or not.
We don't have any word in Portuguese, for example, for seishi, that you put like life and death. But the Japanese have like seishi gaku, or something like this. So maybe I don't know how much do they use those kind of.
I don't know.
What is the Chinese? I mean,
Yes, right.
what's the
No,
Chinese?
I agree. But
No, but the Chinese.
you can make so.
Yeah, sure, yeah. You can have
examples.
another.
Not only Nishida, for example, Dogen or Uji.
Yeah.
Yes.
But for me, okay, but no.
Yeah.
We change the topic too much.
Yeah.
Shall we continue? Or maybe there is other question.
So if someone from Zoom want to enter the discussion or put question, you are
Okay.
in yourself every moment.
Contradiction, there's time.
Yes, Luca has another question.
Or in his book, Complementarity Beyond Physics, states that complementarity eyesight exhausts the knowledge about atomic systems. Do you think the same thing can be applied to Nishida's root? I mean, that the dialectical world is exhausted by the complementarity between E and A. Is something that exhausts.
Yes, but the difference is that Bohr didn't have that concept of a medium of play or place. It's a plus in Nishida, that concept of medium and place. And I think that it exhausts the meaning of the medium, that concept of concomitance. But we will see if we have time. Now I will enter in the problem of self-identity of absolutely contrary elements. So I will.
Yes, I know. Sure. Oh, you have something to add? Luca? No, it's okay. Okay, so we go on with the next chapter.
The previous analysis of two areas of discourse, both centered on the concept of concomitance, underscores the considerable importance that Nishida, notably influenced by Bohr, placed on the relationships between subject and object. He emphasized the pivotal role of complementarity in quantum mechanics. For him, the world is not shaped by the strict mechanical causality of classical physics, but rather through the concomitance of subject and object, a relationship that he described as the reciprocal complementarity of subject and object. And don't forget that when Nishida is speaking about concomitance of or complementarity, they are the medium. They are playing the role of the medium. Now, Nishida simultaneously expressed these concepts of concomitance and complementarity in terms of self-identity. Even before the pivotal year of 1933, which will be discussed in this section, Nishida has already explored the concept of self-identity on numerous occasions. Linguistically, he experimented with various combinations of characters before definitively establishing it as Jiko Doitsu in the essay, The Absolutely Contradictory Self-Identity. Over time, Nishida demonstrated that the true meaning of self-identity, and now it's against the Aristotle logic, apparently. Over time, he demonstrated that the true meaning of self-identity is not that A is A. Rather, it lies in the unity of contrary elements. In other words, self-identity is both subjective and objective, as well as multiple and one. It is important to clarify that the concept of self-identity simply signifies unity. Nishida says the dialectical movement must be based on the concomitance of absolute negation and affirmation, on the concomitance of absolute nothingness and being. It must be the unity of absolutely contrary elements, that is, a self-identity where, simultaneously, these elements are in close contact with each other and do not know one another. In this sense, concomitance, complementarity, and unity are synonyms for self-identity as conceived by Nishida. Nishida's emphasis on the equivalence between self-identity and unity is crucial as it helps to address a significant difficulty. Self-identity implies a self-referentiality that seems incompatible with the presence of contrary concepts, which by definition are distinctly separate. I'm thinking it here a problem that I had for a long time about this self-identity, this auto-identity, this jiko doitsu. And finally, with that kind of quotation, I became aware that self-identity means simply unity. Thus, the question arises, how is it possible to emphasize the combination of these contrary concepts through self-identity without obscuring the fact that they are completely different from one another? To resolve this problem, Nishida emphasizes that self-identity is far from being a mere identity incompatible with difference. It does not involve identifying contrary concepts to the point of erasing their distinctiveness. Instead, self-identity combines contrary concepts while maintaining a distance between them, meaning it preserves their absolute difference. Individual things determined by the plane of the self-identity of absolutely contrary elements, where subject and object are concomitant, are located within it, are distanced from each other by absolute negation and face one another. End of quote. This concomitance of distancing and face-to-face encounter is crucial. After a period during which Nishida explored the role of self-identity in relation to several key concepts within his philosophical system, he began with the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, an in-depth analysis of various expressions aimed at clarifying the relationships between the concept of self-identity and the contrary concepts it seeks to combine. These expressions include the aforementioned self-identity of absolutely contrary elements, zettai ni aihansuru mono no jiko doitsu, the self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements, zettai mojun no jiko doitsu, and the absolutely contradictory self-identity, zettai mojun tiki jiko doitsu. We can discuss after about the translation problem. Why did Nishida thus move from one expression to another? The underlying reason for this crucial transition will gradually emerge in the following sections. For now, it is sufficient to note that the expressions self-identity of absolutely contrary elements and self-identity of absolutely contradictory elements always explicitly involve two complementary factors, which are combined through the concept of self-identity, id est unity. In contrast, the concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity does not always require the explicit mention of contrary or contradictory concepts. This is because it is self-identity itself that becomes contradictory. But let us proceed step by step. The year 1933 marked a crucial turning point in Nishida's philosophical system. To explain the structure of the dialectical world, he linked the concept of absolutely contrary elements, zettai ni aihansuru mono, with self-identity as previously defined, thus formulating the concept of the self-identity of absolutely contrary elements. The first occurrence of this formula appears in the opening chapter of the first volume of Fundamental Problems of Philosophy, titled Prolegomena to Metaphysics. He says, the individual thing is determined insofar as it faces another individual thing. At the core of this fact, there must be the self-identity of absolutely contrary elements. This concept remained central to Nishida's thought until 1938, especially in Human Existence, the first essay of the third volume of Philosophical Essays. By absolutely contrary elements, Nishida refers to the concepts belonging to the two domains described earlier, namely subject and object, self and world, consciousness and matter, mind and body, as well as time and space. These concepts are considered absolutely contrary because each retains its distinctiveness, evaluating the unification achieved by self-identity. Moreover, this profusion of absolutely contrary elements implies an underlying dialectical movement that enables their interrelation. On this topic, Hegel's influence on Nishida was notable, but partial. While Nishida occasionally adopted Hegel's terminology, he significantly altered its meaning. In Nishida's views, the structure of the world is dialectical, but that form of dialectics preserves the contrary aspects of the concepts involved. Will I continue? Continue for a while, or?
We can stop and see if there are questions.
Okay.
Why contrary elements and not contradictory elements?
No.
I mean, already in his work from that which acts to that which sees, Nishida shows to be well aware of the difference between contraries and contradictories.
Mm-hmm.
So why is he returning here to the contraries? Why is it so important for me to speak about contraries and not only of contradictories? Contrary and contradictory are two completely different things. I mean,
I have not solved that problem yet, to be honest. Okay, because somewhere he says that contradictory concepts are logical contradictories. For example, A and B. Okay, but after he began to use contradictory concepts instead of contrary concepts. I have not resolved that transition yet. Maybe one of you.
Concepts be contradictory. I mean, contradictions are between statements,
Yeah.
right? You know, I mean, life and death, are they contradictory concepts? No.
well, A and non-A can be contradictory, right? Even objects can be contradictory, A and not A.
Huh?
A and not A are contradictory objects. I mean, you are taking the complementary of a thing with respect to the universal sets.
No, but no, I don't know. I mean, A and not A, are they contradictory? The book over there, Fukujin, that's A, and the rest of the universe is not A. So where's the contradiction? It's complementarity.
Yeah, at least in when I translated Hataraku mono kara miru mono e, I think that Nishida is very aware of the distinction that Aristotle makes among enantiom and I took a notice today, antipasticos. So in the physics and in the categories, Aristotle distinguished clearly what is contrary or opposite.
Mhm.
You can change also the translation of what is contradictory.
Mhm.
Referring to the concept of metabole,
Mhm.
he said there can be a changement between a substract to a substract,
Mhm.
or from a non-substract to a substract, or from a substract to a non-substract.
Mhm.
If you have a changement between two substracts, they are contrary.
Yes.
Because you have a universal
Mhm.
that make possible the transition from one to the other. For example, the Nishida makes always the example of colors. We can say that white and black are the most contrary, and you can think all the colors changing from black to white and from white to black because you have the universal concept of color. But Aristotle say that generation and corruption or birth and death, they are not contrary, opposite or contrary, but they are contradictory because you change not from a substrate to another substrate, but for example, from non-substrate to substrate when you, for example, something comes to existence, or from substrate to non-substrate when something disappears or dies. And in this case, what I understood for Nishida is important. You don't have a universal concept that mediates, but the mediation is only the negation. And I think this is also would be also relevant to understand the relation among Hegel's dialectics and Nishida's thought. Because only the negation is the medium, the soku or the concomitance between life and death, because they are contradictories. They are not simply opposites. And negation then is the medium. The soku is negation in this sense. And there is no universal substrate that mediates. I think in this sense, Hegel it should be very clear. So he denies every substrate. This is the pure metaphysical ontology in the sense of Hegel. And I think Nishida make at least I don't know how to translate from the actor to the seer, has very clear this distinction, and he started to think in the essay Basho exactly this different. Basho is Basho of nothingness. It's not a metaphysical substratum that mediates opposite, but it's the negation itself that enables the relations among contradictories. And it is, I think, for Nishida, is a clear difference theoretically. Therefore, for example, I think it's of course good to translate Toitsu with unity, and I do sometimes, particularly when, for example, Nishida relates to a German term Einheit. So I have to, but I prefer normally to translate with unification in Italian when it's possible, because it's a dynamism. It's not a static unity, but it's a dialectical dynamism among the contraries.
It's everything moving inside of this unity, right? Changing and and that's very Aristotelian as well.
Therefore, I would put you the same question to the Saint, but the Saint already answered that why Nishida go back to Aihan Surumono. So from the actor to the seer, Aihan Surumono is the translation Nishida choose related to Aristotle to translate the contraries or the opposite. And Mujunteki Mono is contradictories. So even if it was already clear in 1976 when he wrote Basho, so why in 1930 he comes back to use this terminology is also fascinating.
So what I said a while ago is incorrect. The oak is not contradictory to the acorn, but is contrary, and there is a substrate of some kind, which we might call I don't know what we would call it, natural in form.
Yes. So I try, at least when I think Nishida and try to translate it to our. So I start from the presupposition that for Nishida there is no substrate at all. So substratlose Tätigkeit. This is a word that Nishida uses already in the 20s.
Substratlose
Tätigkeit.
Sorry?
Tätigkeit.
I see, an activity.
Substratlose Tätigkeit. He uses, for example, this kind of terminology, German terminology, to speak about this kind of dynamism, that is the dynamism of the activity of consciousness at the time, but then he changed in the 30s and the 40s to the dynamism of the world, of the historical world. But should be, at least I expected that it should be the same theoretical structure also in the late Nishida.
But this Tätigkeit would not be itself a kind of substrate, just as energy, not matter.
Exactly, I think so.
Mhm.
Okay, I will continue for a while.
Yes, Lucas, do you have something to add?
I would like, but I mean, we still have a half for the.
No, but I think, so, but just as probably we can decide now that we cannot go to the end of this.
Impossible.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So
Let's discuss a bit more because you've raised so many things there.
but just to confirm the time, I'm sorry, we are finishing at 6 today or
More or
past
less,
6, okay.
We can
That's
also
fine.
go over, but I don't know if the person's on Zoom.
Yeah.
Because we could also think of a weak form of contradiction, keeping ourselves in the same genus. For example, we take white, not white, it's also gray, orange, yellow. But what is black? Black is the contrary of white, not only contradictory. So black is the property which is the furthest from white, which has the most possible distance from white. And maybe it is that has a role in Nishida's thought. The fact to take something which is at the furthest possible distance of the object.
But it says too that blue and red are not contrary concepts.
Are not contrary.
Black and white are, but not blue and red.
Expert color theory, so I wouldn't be able to choose that.
Or how Japanese think about color.
But I can read it because I saw this citation you cited. Individual things determined by the plane of the self-identity of absolutely contrary elements,
But we,
and located within are distanced from each other by absolute negation and face one another. So maybe this idea that we have to introduce the furthest possible distance from two concepts in order to put them in self-identity, contradictory self-identity. He's interested maybe in the fact that we have to take really the furthest possible distance. I know it's an important.
Because black and white can be can have a common ground, but not blue and red.
Okay. Just saying.
Yes.
Professor Odagiri would like to receive your paper.
Yes, of course.
Is it possible?
Yes.
Okay, Professor Odagiri, I will send you later the PDF.
But it's not the final version. I have
Yeah.
some mistakes and some typing mistakes.
So, but if, oh, thanks. Okay, I'll send you later.
but I think about the black and white, they are, sorry, once again, they are contraries, right? But they can also be contradictories as well, right? Because you cannot be.
Yeah, you can apply the principle of no
Black and
contradiction in
white
the form of
is-
Aristotle to black or white at the same time. So they're also contradictories.
Yeah, so that's.
But not for Aristotle, I think. So you have to pay attention. Aristotle distinguished very carefully.
Yes.
So if you have a substrate, universal substrate that mediates, like color for colors.
Yes, I know, yeah, that's
Be
different. Yeah,
contradictory.
sure. Sure. Yeah.
But why?
Nishida doesn't have the substantial, so.
But therefore, you should prefer to speak about contradictory instead of contradictories.
Contradictions.
Also,
Yeah.
Mm,
Difficult, especially.
I'm still a bit unhappy with using contradiction to refer to things or events or isolated concepts, because they can always be brought together in some conciliatory. I mean, you mentioned birth and death, which we just saw that birth and death are brought together as a single process in Buddhism and in spiritual thinking. So I don't think there's any way you can say black is contradictory to white or life is contradictory to death. Contradiction only arises when there is a question of truth between two propositions. I mean, that's it, you know.
but not for Nishida, I think.
Because I think ultimately the contradiction is between consciousness and action. I mean, he wants to go beyond the concept. So, and then if you try to understand the categories and conceptual domain and these both contradictions and the opposites, and all of these are conceptual involvements of the representation of the world in conceptual terms, right? But I think ultimately he wants to actually get to the world. And what mediates is this action intuition, the immediacy of our involvement, right? And then you go beyond this barrier of representation, so to speak. Even though the only way in which we can represent that is through representations. So you do have to deal with this conceptual things, but what he wants to get at, is actually the historical world. And it's not the concept of the historical world with concepts of the entities in relation. No, he wants direct
Yes.
tsugang.
Action is a key concept.
Yeah, that's why these 働くものから見るもの, yeah, that's very important. And then also why it's important to this. Yeah, it's like it starts earlier in this, yeah, the 行為の問題, these actions, yeah. It's not the notion of the action, but he's talking about doing things, yeah. But that's, yeah, when you pick up a thing, it is not conceptual. You did something and you are done by it something, right? So it's this direct immediacy of involvement. I mean, I'm just picking up the bottle as a small example, but the only way in which we can describe it is through concepts. And you can say, well, subject, object, all these things. But he wants to undercut all this, yeah? That's his sort of a weird Zen moment, yeah?
It's a very good summary.
Yeah, but it is something like that, right? So that that's the ultimate opposite. Or
How does he undercut it? I mean,
because you grab the thing.
I know, but I mean, he has all this vast dialectic of absolutely contradictory concepts. Are they meant to explode or implode and then free you into this?
I think so, yeah. That's the ultimate nothingness, right? Because it is not, I mean, it is in this absolute presence as absolute nothingness in my holding this cup. It's not conceptual. Yeah? You cannot ever get to this conceptual, this individual, because this individual is not a concept.
Yes, well,
Not even the concept of the individual.
But at the same time, you cannot understand the concept if you don't have the universal, the Kubutsu.
Yeah. But it's
That's very Aristotelian as well, you know.
Yeah, it's very interesting in this existential way. I mean, that's the interesting thing about Nishida, because it's not at all like Hegel.
But this also makes the link with quantum mechanics, I think, because the idea of quantum mechanics is that you cannot just open this Platonic eye on the reality and observe reality and consider reality. In order to see things at a microscopic level, you have to throw a sheaf of electrons, and this sheaf perturbs matter.
Yeah.
So that you cannot understand the motion and the.
It's not it's not in.
Yeah, you have to perform an action to, in order to know. You're just not contemplating things.
That's right. So it is this.
And you also need to know what you're looking for, right? Because if you don't know, like the results, if you understand, right? When we had the presentation on Nishida and physics, remember, around 6 months ago, right? And that's what we are trying to understand. Remember that?
Yeah, because
the result, the answer depends on the question you're asking, or the result depends on.
Depends of the measuring devices.
Yes.
No, but it's true. But for example, if you take Heisenberg indetermination principle, well, this principle states that you cannot know with arbitrary precision the position and the velocity of a particle. So you have to understand what do you want to know. And so according to that, you can make an interrogation to reality according to what you want to know. But you cannot know with arbitrary precision the two things at the same time.
you cannot know the two things at the same time.
With arbitrary precision. There's a limit in this precision, yeah.
Okay, we continue. Just one more part.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, but we will enter in set theory the next time. Maybe not today. A particularly clear example of self-identity of absolutely contrary elements is the concomitance between time and space. A thorough examination of this relationship is also essential for adequately understanding the concomitance of subject E and object A within the medium M. Nishida stated that insofar as the interpretation of
Can we share the screen, Professor Odagiri? Professor Odagiri, you cannot see the text in this moment.
but I am sharing.
So I don't know. It is possible to have a paper, yes, later, but can we share the screen?
Oh,
No, oh, really?
the whole time they were not seeing the screen?
Oh,
I think
I'm
before
very
he
sorry.
said-
I asked at the beginning, you can see the text and someone answered yes.
You were in the meeting as well, or not?
Yeah,
Yes.
I should check. This
This one.
Yeah, this one. I see a part of the text.
Maybe it's not
This-
scrolling or
I only
something?
see the participants. Maybe it's something that he needs to change there, right?
For me, the screen is
Yeah.
visible.
For me, the screen-
Oh, I found it. Okay. So,
Yes,
okay,
right.
so
Yeah, because
I'm
there was a
very
part,
sorry.
yeah.
I've done that.
So, okay. Jacinth, please.
Okay. A thorough examination of this relationship is also essential for adequately understanding the concomitance of subject A and object E and object A within the medium M. Nishida stated that insofar as the interpretation of quantum mechanics must be extended to all aspects of the world, including the human being, the complementarity of subject and object must be linked to the complementarity of the temporal and spatial aspects of the human being. In response to Augustine's questions about the nature of time, Nishida reasserted that it flows rectilinearly from the infinite past to the infinite future. Consequently, it is therefore impossible to return to the past even for an instant. In his 1935 lecture, The Logical Structure of the World of Actuality, Nishida inserted time in the following sequence: subject, time, mind, individual thing. An example Nishida frequently used to illustrate this rectilinear progression of time is the birth of a child from two parents. Pure rectilinear continuity, therefore, refers exclusively to the determination of the individual E of several individuals E, who is intrinsically linked to temporality. As Nishida emphasized, the individual self signifies that each human being possesses their own time. As an individual thing, the self thus moves and acts temporally. In contrast to this rectilinear time, space is the place in which all things and events are located. It involves planar relations and expands horizontally in every direction. Nishida inserted space in the following sequence: object, space, things, universal. This spatial or circular determination of the dialectical world is based on a planar determination of the present M, which Nishida compares to an infinite circle whose center is everywhere and whose the circumference is nowhere. The present, which for Nishida is equivalent to the world of actuality, is the place within all instants of time, and correspondingly, all past, present, and future determinations of the self coexist. In other words, the present is a medium which ensures the concomitance of the past and the future. The temporal aspect associated with the aforementioned sequence E and the spatial aspect associated with the sequence A are not close on themselves. For example, the self is a geometrical point, and as such, it is devoid of spatial extension. This point E is the equivalent of an instant, meaning there is no difference between the self and the present instant. However, the self extends outward through contact with otherness. It does not matter whether this otherness designates a stone, a plant, an animal, or another human being. Such a spatial extension of the self allows it to become parallel with or even encompass the objective world A. Thus, from its internal position, the self is a point, while from its extension, it is a place. From this spatial extension of the self, it follows that children are not born of their parents. Following the previous temporal and rectilinear conception, it is undoubtedly true that children are born from their parents. But if we complement this temporal point of view with a spatial point of view, children and parents are seen as equal. They are strictly equal individuals in essence and in love. Nishida says, for example, that the child's personality is not coming from their his or her parents. In summary, the world of actuality determines itself simultaneously through the temporal domain of the subject and the spatial and circumferential domain of the object. He says, fundamentally, time and space must unify. They must form the two planes of the medium. Everything within this plane of intersection is both subjective and objective. Time and space are unified, provided that the temporal subject and the spatial object are also unified. Therefore, Nishida associates in a complementary manner the temporal sequence of the spatial and the spatial sequence as the two concomitant determinations of the same dialectical world, as illustrated below by means of a brace. To further highlight the significance of these two sequences, Nishida represented the subjective component E and the temporal sequence T. I made a mistake here. Yes, it's great. It's okay. Nishida represented the subjective component E of the temporal sequence T by means of a vertical axis, and the material component EA of the spatial sequence S using the horizontal axis. Basically, that's the same than the previous circular schematic. It's only the core. This schematic is similar to the previous circular schematic, with the difference that instead of emphasizes only an individual self as element of the domain of the individual thing, it presents two planes of determination of the medium, namely time and space. Okay, I will stop here for today. After that, I use the set theory, namely the product set and the Cartesian plane, and I add my own interpretation from the chessboard, the chess game, to show what contrary concepts are and how Nishida will unit them. How Nishida had already united them through concomitance, and how he will unit them through the shift in concepts through time. Okay.
What you just said is very un-Einsteinian and pre-Einsteinian. Time and space are entangled.
It's Einsteinian, totally.
No,
Yes.
it's pre-Einsteinian because time and space are entangled in Einstein. I mean,
Yeah, but they are here.
if you go fast enough, space changes. If you speed up the time, I mean, you know,
Measures of space change.
I mean, in this version, we're sort of back with Kant, where we just have subjective time and objective space.
Yes, the thing like this, it is static. And after I comparing it with the Cartesian plane. But if Nishida put them together, it's fundamentally under the influence of Einstein too. But in other schematics, Joseph, Nishida will illustrate that the moving individual and the movement of history through that structure. So it's incomplete here. It's just the skeleton.
Right, but well, I mean, it's not just a matter of perception; it's a matter of objective fact.
The objection persists insofar as, for example, I think Nishida also classifies objective with space, right? The objective and the space are put in the same direction. But as Professor observed, when you're dealing with the general relativity, I mean, measures of space can change according to the subject perspective. That's the problem.
I mean,
so when Nishida classifies and puts entirely, I mean, object in the category of space and subject in the category of time, it's a bit of a problem with respect to general relativity.
Completely, because he puts the individual on the space axis too, on the horizontal axis too. Yes, we will discuss, if I'm making another seminar on this, we will have the opportunity to discuss more at point.
That sounds more similar to Bergson than Einstein, no?
To
Bergson.
Yes.
The thing is I don't remember now. The time is the now is in time. I don't remember, but I don't know. It really relates to me. I don't remember. Yeah, I just close here as well. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't remember
it's complicated with Nishida because we have to be a specialist of everything, but it's not possible.
Well, the thing is, the time, I mean, there's a famous duality between lived time or human time or subjective time and the objective time of physics. And if you invoke the objective time of physics, you can no longer contrast time as subjective and space as objective, because the two are so intricately co-involved in space-time, space-time.
It's what Nishida is trying to do, in fact.
Sorry?
It is what Nishida is trying to do.
What is he trying to do?
To show that time and space are combined through what he calls the dialectical thing. You will see on my paper, I have a complete section on this.
Right, but please address just what I said, because if you keep referring to your future chapters, lost.
But it's to say that this figure, this schematic is static, but what Nishida is trying to do is not static. On the contrary.
So we reobtain general relativity as a consequence of absolutely contradictory self-identity.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
So probably Nishida.
Nishida unites time and space in his own way.
And then maybe that after 27 or something, he begins the eternal present, right? This other notion. Yeah.
Yes.
That there's a lot of discussion on the unity of. It's not unity. It's like two different ways of reading it, but we're not talking about two different things.
No.
Yeah, but it's the eternal present, the space here now.
Yes, time and space are emerging from the eternal present.
Both, yeah. But it's the now, right? It's the here
The
now.
now,
The here.
yes, eternal now.
Sorry, it was my mistake.
Instant zero.
Yeah, it was my mistake, because here say, in other words, the present is a medium which ensures the concomitance of the past and the future. So Bergson would say that the time is a medium, right? Not the present, right? I don't know. Yeah, right?
Because yes, Bergson
wouldn't say
focused
that.
on time.
Yes, right. He
For
will say the
him, to
present
speak
is
about
outside.
space is
Yeah.
a dissolution of the mind in the diversity.
Yes, sorry, I misread that.
There are two things. One short thing that, if I remember correctly, in the conferences Nishida made for the people for the professors in Shinshu, he wrote this kind of schematism on the board, and he said, but it's very difficult to give a visual description with a schematism of what I'm saying. So please, I think this is too much static. It's a schematic, but it's just a hint to try to explain.
Yes.
I think Nishida said it in the comments. There is a question from the old people in Zoom, from Bendik Manum, and Bendik asked, sorry, I've changed my glasses. Is there time to show one of your chess illustrations?
Yes.
We are here for that.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Wait a minute, please.
25, page 25.
This one. I love this one. Okay? Because it's only the upper part, the right upper part of the Nishida schematic here. And here, Joseph's exactly, it's the combination of time and space through what Nishida calls the dialectical thing. That is,
Dialectical thing.
the dialectical thing is the human being, insofar as it has two parts, a consciousness and a body. Okay?
A consciousness.
A consciousness. The consciousness is the temporal part and the body the spatial part. So the human being itself is the combination of time and space. And with the chessboard here, I am explaining that if we associate the numbers here to the space, axis of space, and if we associate if we associate the letters to the domain of space, if we associate the numbers to the domain of time, each pound is from a number and a letter. Okay, like each human being is from a body associated to the axis of space, associated analogically to the letters here. So each human being is from a body and from a consciousness associated to the vertical axis of numbers on the chessboard. So I made a comparison with I took that 3 pounds and I took the present self. It is not represented on the chessboard, but the first pound is M1. That is to say, the self of tomorrow. M2 is M2, the self of the day after tomorrow. And the third pound is the M3, the self in 3 days. And these selves are always composed, can I say composed? Composed from a body and from a consciousness, a spatial body and a consciousness. So whenever the self, the present self is composed from a body and a consciousness, the self of tomorrow will be composed from a body and a consciousness, and so on. So here is a complete unification of time and space.
But it sounds to me like Cartesian dualism.
What?
It sounds to me like Cartesian dualism. I don't see any.
Where is the dualism in this? Where is the dualism?
Well, it's the sharp distinction between mind and body.
But who made that sharp distinction between mind and body?
Descartes.
It was Descartes.
Yes.
So Nishida said explicitly, I am doing this to put into question Descartes' perspective.
But how is he doing it? I don't see him doing it. I see him subscribing to it, on the contrary.
I see other things.
Sorry?
I see the unifying process in the human being of its two components, two parts.
But
I think Nishida is doing this, but the Cartesian play is not a good model. That's the point.
the chessboard is
The Cartesian play is not a good model of this thing, I think.
Play is not a good what?
A good model of what Nishida is thinking about this self-contradictory.
something.
Actually, it's no good mathematical model of a contradiction by definition.
But it was almost 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, it was in the air, that criticism of Descartes. So it starts from
At
there.
least in the Basho, as far as I remember, he says that when he's criticizing Descartes, he's saying that not exactly this, but we tend to think of things as being like subjects and objects and stuff, but that's just the way that we are organizing things in not reality, but in actuality, things all exist as this unity or unification, right? As Enrico was saying. So I think it's doesn't sound to me as a contradiction to work with the cards and to deal with what Nishida is saying.
Maybe
Yeah.
Okay.
of course, I skipped all the part about the set theory. And if we look at the mathematical formula here, I don't see dualism in it.
How would you map what you said earlier about the force cane? How would you map that on that chessboard?
A pawn, simply a pawn.
Sorry?
One of the 3 pawns, okay? Because
I didn't catch.
there is no difference for Nishida and Bohr
Yeah.
between a body and a body with a cane. When the cane and the body become one.
That's right.
Unified.
But they're not always one.
But in that case, they are.
The point is that when you're taking a Cartesian plane, I mean, you're taking a pair of numbers, right? The first one belonging to the first set and the second one belonging to the second set. These 2 numbers can vary in an independent way, okay? There's no relation between the variation of the first coordinate and the variation of the second coordinate. That's the definition of the Cartesian plane, right? You have no relation between the two terms. The 2 coordinates are just opposed just in a formal way. That's the problem with the Cartesian plane, and why the Cartesian plane is not, in my opinion, a good model to express this contradictory self-identity.
Nishida start from that.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a fact.
Actually, he has been dealing with this for
What?
30 years. But by that time, Nishida has been dealing with this
Cartesian.
not refusing, but negating the Cartesian dualism for 20 years or something, right?
Yeah.
Already, yeah?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why does it choose the Cartesian plane after denying the Cartesian duality for 20 years? It's a model.
Cartesian plane, for him, was a good illustration of the putting together the two planes, the two parts. But Nishida criticized a lot of people, but he never rejected all of their philosophy.
Yeah,
He always took something.
he likes everything. Yeah, I understand.
Philosopher, mathematician.
Also, this chessboard would be infinite as well, right?
Oh, yes, there
Okay,
is no
okay.
limit.
Okay.
So I think that's, do you want to add? So probably we need another seminar to read the part on the
So, yeah.
So I think because we are planning to publish this book by the end of March with all the translation of Zeta Mujuntekiji Chikodoitsu, and the book will be download free on internet, so also the participants can see it. After the publication of the translation, we could organize a series of talks, and you could continue your presentation, and for example, the other speakers could give, and we could work on the topic of Zeta Mujuntekiji Chikodoitsu again, using the translation. So,
Is that from Chizukuto or
from the institute.
from the institute?
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. Who's doing the German?
Get it.
Yeah.
Get it already translated.
And you gave some good
Actually,
ideas for me for Portuguese as well, with the contraposição and stuff. So thank you. I added here.
So we can. We have only to wait till March because I think it's difficult to be ready before. But after March, we will have the translation. So we can also think to organize this kind of seminar, choosing a language, for example, and using one translation, for example, in German with the German translation, in French with the French translation.
I would love to read like one paragraph in all of its languages.
Yes,
you can almost do it
I think
already.
we are really excited from this idea, and also because we have not only Western translation, but also translation in Chinese.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I see Niklas Söderman suddenly, probably, I think some people already left the.
Well, I think it's because just since she stopped the.
Okay. So I see, thank you for the presentation.
It's possible to access read the current version of the entire text.
So also Bendik asked for the entire text of Professor Tremblay text. Bendik, are you intending the essay or Nishida's text we are referring to?
No, I think he's talking about
The
her text, yeah, because
The PDF.
the current version.
If just say yes, we can send the essay. Okay, I sent it up to you.
The text of that presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, but it's not perfect yet.
So Bendik, you have to. So it's not perfect, but if it is not good enough for you, probably we can send it to you and Professor Odagiri too, if I don't forget. Probably I have the email addresses, so I can send it then.
Yes, please.
So thank you to everyone. Next week we'll have 2 workshops. Probably you already received the invitation. One organized by Professor Arisaka, and Tuesday in the afternoon here in Japan, so in the morning in Europe. And during the weekend, Friday and Saturday, there is another workshop on Jaspers and Japanese philosophy. The next Nishida seminar will be December 6th.
Not in November.
No, not in November, because we have we cannot use the room here on Friday because there is a Nanza salon. And therefore we have to move a week later, will December 6th, and the speaker will be Professor Arizaka and Pier Giacomo.
But it's gonna be completely different. I mean,
Yes, but this is
That's the idea.
the interesting point of this
I'm
kind
not
of
even
Nishida
going to
seminar.
now, but it- like.
And yes, so the next appointments that are already fixed are these two. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to you, Gabriel. You are always welcome, and we can probably finish here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Intensive session.
Yeah.